It started on a cold, rainy night. A young girl, barely old enough to be on her own, stood at the corner of a dimly lit intersection, holding a battered sign. Her clothes were torn, her face pale, and her eyes carried a desperation that couldn't be ignored. Drivers passed by, barely sparing her a glance. But then, something strange happened. She didn't ask for money or food like you might expect. Instead, she held up her hand and yelled at a passing car, "Don't drive. You'll regret it." The warning seemed bizarre, almost out of place, but what followed was even stranger. Her message wasn't random. The girl seemed to know something is secret, a danger that others couldn't see. The story could have ended there, but someone took notice. News of her warning reached the ears of none other than Melania Trump, who, moved by the mystery, decided to look deeper. What she discovered sent shockwaves through her world and changed everything for the girl standing at that rainy intersection. What was the secret this young girl carried? How did it connect to Melania Trump? And why was she so adamant that no one should drive that night? Stay tuned, because what comes next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about coincidence, fate, and the power of a single voice. The rain fell harder as the girl stood motionless, her warning still echoing in the ears of a driver who had barely rolled up their window in time. It wasn't just her words that were unsettling, it was the urgency in her voice, the kind that suggested she knew something no one else did. Most people dismissed her as just another homeless kid trying to get attention, but a few couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her message. One of those people was a man named David, a ride-share driver who had been passing through the intersection. He had noticed her out of the corner of his eye but hadn't thought much of it until he saw her reflection in his rearview mirror. She wasn't just standing there anymore. She was watching his car, her hand raised as if she was trying to stop him from leaving. It unnerved him so much that he pulled over a few blocks away, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. Meanwhile, Melania Trump had come across a video clip of the girl online. Someone had recorded her warning and uploaded it, and it was quickly going viral. The title read, "Homeless Girl Knows Something We Don't. What is she hiding?" Intrigued, Melania felt an unusual pull to understand this story. Perhaps it was her own experiences with philanthropy or the sense that this girl needed someone to truly listen. Whatever it was, she made a few calls and set the wheels in motion to locate her. Back at the intersection, the girl continued her vigil. People began to notice that she wasn't leaving, not even as the rain soaked her through. A few drivers rolled down their windows to ask if she needed help, but she shook her head every time. "Just don't drive tonight," she repeated, her voice steady but filled with an urgency that was hard to ignore. One woman asked her why, but the girl's response was cryptic, "You'll see. Just trust me." The rain turned into a storm as the night dragged on. David, still shaken by the encounter, decided to drive back to the intersection. He parked nearby, watching her from a distance. Something about her didn't add up. She wasn't begging for money, and she wasn't acting erratic. She was just waiting. But for what? David wasn't sure if it was curiosity or guilt that made him get out of the car and approach her, but as he did, she turned to him with an intensity that froze him in place. "You can feel it, can't you?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. David blinked, unsure how to respond. "Feel what?" he managed to say, though his throat felt tight. "It's not safe," she said simply, her eyes locking onto his. "Something's coming." At that moment, a deafening crash echoed through the streets. Both David and the girl turned to see the source of the noise. A delivery truck had skidded out of control a few blocks away, slamming into a lamppost. The sound of metal screeching against metal was almost unbearable, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. David's first instinct was to run toward the accident, but the girl grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "It's not over," she said. "This is just the beginning." The scene grew more chaotic as bystanders gathered, some trying to help the driver of the truck while others called 911. The girl stayed rooted in place, her eyes scanning the street as if she were waiting for something else to happen. David, despite his better judgment, stayed by her side, his mind racing with questions he couldn't bring himself to ask. Meanwhile, Melania's team had made progress. They tracked down the video's original poster, who happened to be a local reporter. The reporter explained that she had been covering a story on rising homelessness in the city when she stumbled upon the girl. "There's something about her," the reporter said during a phone call. "She's not like the others. It's like she knows things she shouldn't." This piqued Melania's curiosity even more. She asked her team to arrange a meeting with the reporter, hoping to piece together the puzzle of who this girl was and why her warning seemed so urgent. As the night wore on, the tension in the city seemed to escalate. Reports of strange occurrences started to trickle in a series of unexplained power outages, vehicles stalling without reason, and an eerie fog that began creeping through the streets. It was as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. David, still with the girl, decided to press her for answers. "You keep saying it's not safe," he said. "But what does that mean? What's coming?" She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she said. "But if you want to stay alive, you need to listen to me. Don't drive. Don't leave. Just stay here." Before David could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Emergency vehicles raced past them, heading toward another accident. The girl didn't flinch, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if she were seeing something no one else could. At the same time, Melania's meeting with the reporter took an unexpected turn. The reporter revealed that she had spoken to the girl briefly before posting the video. "She said something about a pattern," the reporter explained. "Like she could see things before they happened. It didn't make sense at the time, but now I'm starting to wonder if she was onto something." Melania leaned forward, her mind racing. "Did she say what kind of pattern?" she asked. The reporter hesitated. "Not exactly. But she kept mentioning the roads. Something about how they're connected in ways we don't understand." The mystery deepened as the night stretched on. David and the girl stayed near the intersection, the storm growing fiercer with each passing hour. Melania's team worked tirelessly to uncover the girl's identity, following every lead they could find. And throughout it all, the city seemed to teeter on the edge of something no one could fully comprehend. What did the girl know? Why was she so certain that driving was dangerous? And how was Melania Trump connected to all of this? As the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together, one thing became clear: this was no ordinary night, and the answers everyone sought were far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. David stood frozen beside the girl as the storm raged on, his mind spinning with questions he didn't dare voice. The weight of her words "it's not over" hung heavy in the air, amplifying the unease that had settled deep in his chest. He glanced at her, drenched and shivering but unshaken, as if the chaos surrounding them were just another piece of a puzzle only she could see. A block away, emergency crews worked frantically to clear the wreckage of the delivery truck crash. The scene was chaotic: flashing lights, muffled shouts, and the hum of engines struggling to move through flooded streets. Yet somehow, the girl didn't seem concerned with any of it. Her focus was elsewhere, her gaze fixed on the horizon like she was waiting for something or someone. "Why won't you tell me what's really going on?" David finally asked, his voice strained. "If there's something I need to know, you have to tell me now." She looked up at him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "It's not something I can just explain. You'll see for yourself soon enough." Before David could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an alert from a local news app: breaking, unexplained power outages continue across the city. Officials urge residents to stay indoors. He frowned, scrolling through the article. Reports of strange electrical surges and stalled vehicles were pouring in from all over the city. It was as if something was systematically shutting everything down. Meanwhile, across town, Melania Trump was piecing together her own part of the mystery. Her team had managed to track down the girl's identity. Her name was Ava, and she had been missing from a foster care system in a neighboring state for months. But that wasn't the most shocking part. According to records, Ava had been involved in a near-fatal car accident as a child, an accident eerily similar to the one David and the girl had just witnessed. "Do you think she's predicting these crashes?" one of Melania's aides asked hesitantly, breaking the heavy silence in the room. Melania didn't answer right away. She was staring at a grainy photo of Ava from years ago, taken before her life had taken such a tragic turn. There was something haunting about the way the girl seemed to look directly into the camera, as if she knew even then that her life would never follow a normal path. "I don't think she's predicting anything," Melania said finally. "I think she's trying to stop something bigger." Back at the intersection, David's patience was wearing thin. He couldn't shake the feeling that Ava, or whatever her name really was, knew more than she was letting on. "Look, I don't have time for cryptic warnings," he said, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "If you know something that can help people, you need to say it now." Ava's eyes softened, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. "It's not just about tonight," she said quietly. "It's about what's coming after." David frowned. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, the streetlights flickered and went out, plunging the block into darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd that had gathered near the crash site. Panic set in as people scrambled to pull out their phones for light, but even those began to fail one by one. "It's starting," Ava whispered, her voice trembling. In the distance, a low, mechanical hum grew louder, cutting through the sound of the storm. David squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. It sounded like an engine, but not like any engine he'd ever heard before. And then, through the fog, they saw it, a convoy of unmarked vehicles moving slowly but deliberately through the streets. Their headlights cut through the mist, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance with the rain. "What the?" David muttered, stepping in front of Ava instinctively. "They're here," Ava said, her voice barely audible. David turned to her, his pulse racing. "Who's they?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed his arm and pulled him toward an alleyway. "We have to go," she said urgently. "Now." The next few minutes were a blur. David followed Ava as she led him through a maze of backstreets and alleys, the sound of the convoy growing louder behind them. Every so often, she would stop and listen, her head tilted as if she were trying to pick up on something only she could hear. When they finally stopped, they were in an abandoned parking garage on the edge of the city. Ava slumped against a wall, her breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. "Are you going to tell me what's going on now?" David demanded, his frustration boiling over. Ava hesitated, then nodded. "You deserve to know," she said quietly. "But you're not going to like it." She explained, haltingly at first, that the crashes, the power outages, and the strange occurrences were all connected to a series of experiments being conducted by a secret organization. They were testing new technologies that could manipulate energy and disrupt systems on a massive scale. "They don't care who gets hurt," Ava said, her voice shaking. "They're just focused on making it work." David stared at her, his mind racing. "And you know all this because..." She looked away. "Because I was part of it. Or at least, I was supposed to be." Before David could process what she'd said, they heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the parking garage. Ava's eyes widened in fear. "They found us," she whispered. David grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a row of abandoned cars, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know who was after them or what they wanted, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let them take her. As the footsteps grew louder, David prepared himself for the worst. But just as the figures came into view, a deafening roar filled the garage. The ground shook as the convoy's vehicles screeched to a halt outside, their headlights flooding the space with blinding light. And then, everything went still. The next few moments unfolded in a way neither David nor Ava could have predicted. Figures in black uniforms entered the garage, but instead of attacking, they began searching methodically, their movements precise and calculated. David tightened his grip on Ava's hand, his mind racing. What were they looking for? And more importantly, why did Ava seem so certain they were connected to the crashes? As the tension reached its peak, a voice echoed through the garage, calm but commanding. "Ava, we know you're here. Let's not make this harder than it has to be." David turned to Ava, his heart sinking. What do they want from you? She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. It's not just me they want, she said. It's everyone. In that moment, David realized the gravity of the situation. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about one girl or one night. It was about something much bigger, something that could change everything. As the figures closed in, David made a split-second decision. He wasn't going to let them take her without a fight. What followed was a chaotic blur of action, desperation, and unexpected allies. Melania Trump, having pieced together enough of the story, arrived with a team of reporters and advocates determined to expose the truth. Their intervention turned the tide, forcing the shadowy organization into the light. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Investigations were launched, arrests were made, and the full extent of the experiments came to light. Ava's warnings, once dismissed as the ramblings of a homeless girl, became a rallying cry for change. In the end, it wasn't just about stopping the crashes. It was about exposing the systems that allowed such experiments to take place and ensuring they could never happen again. Ava, finally free from the shadows of her past, found a new path forward with the help of people who truly cared. And David, forever changed by the experience, became her fiercest advocate, determined to ensure her voice was never silenced again. As the city began to heal, one thing became clear: sometimes, the most unexpected voices carry the most important messages. And when we choose to listen, we can change the world.